In this recording, we're going to discuss an introduction to bones. The skeletal system includes both your bones, your joints, and any associated supporting tissues. The bones themselves are clearly the main organ of the skeletal system, and like any other organism, they are composed of more than just osseous tissue or bone tissue. In addition to the osseous tissue, your bones are composed of dense regular and dense irregular connective tissue, as well as bone marrow on the interior. We have several functions associated with your skeleton. First of all, we have protection of underlying organs. In our example, you can see that your skull protects the brain. You can also picture your thoracic cage, your ribs and your sternum protect your lungs and your heart. We also have mineral storage and acid-base homeostasis. Most people are fully aware that their bones store calcium, but in addition to calcium, your bones also store phosphorus and magnesium salts. These minerals collectively are critical for electrolyte balance, as well as acid-base homeostasis. Your skeletal system is responsible for bone cell formation. Within the red bone marrow itself, we do a process called hematopoiesis, which is the formation of blood cells. And this is all of your blood cells, your red cells, your white cells, and your platelets. Your skeletal system is also good for fat storage. In addition to red marrow, you also have yellow bone marrow. This yellow marrow is composed of fat cells as well as triglycerides, and we can break these down and use them as a fuel source if we need to. Your skeletal system helps move and support your body. We have anchors or attachment points on the bones themselves to allow your skeletal muscles to grab on and pull or contract. When the muscles contract, we move your bones as well, which moves your whole body. And then support, the skeletal system acts as a framework to support your entire body and give you an overall shape. We can break your skeleton down into two different sections. We have an appendicular and an axial skeleton. Your axial skeleton is pretty much everything right down the middle, your skull, your rib cage, and your vertebral column. Your appendicular skeleton is your arms and legs and the bones that hold your arms and legs onto your axial skeleton. Now, we have a little over 200 bones in your whole body, and we can categorize them based on shape. And several of these are pretty straightforward, and a couple of them have some interesting names to them. First of all, we have long bones, short bones, and flat bones. It will not shock you to learn that long bones are long, short bones are short, and flat bones really are flat. Now, our last three categories, a little bit more complicated. We have irregular bones, which are just kind of funny shaped. They are irregular. Okay. Sutural bones. These grow within the skull mostly. They're these little tiny islands of bones. We'll point those out here in a second. And then we have sesamoid bones. Your sesamoid bones grow within tendons. So we don't have a whole lot of those to speak of, but the one you're most familiar with is your good old patella. Now, long bones are the ones that are the most exciting. They have several structures that we can discuss in more detail. First of all, we have the periosteum, which is a layer of connective tissue that surrounds the outer portion of the bone itself. This periosteum holds blood vessels and nerve fibers in place. So you can see our blood vessels. I don't really see any nerve fibers in our image here, but they would run along the same pathway as the vessels themselves. And somebody has to hold the periosteum in place. That would be the purpose of the perforating fibers. You may hear them termed Sharpey's fibers. Okay. These are collagen fibers that anchor the periosteum in place. It basically acts like a glue. And if you think about, okay, so in your mind, picture taking like a sticker or something off of an item that you just bought. If you peel the sticker really slowly, you can almost see these little, these glue fibers as you stretch the sticker, as you kind of pull it off. That's basically what perforating fibers look like. Okay, if you pull that periosteum back, you get these little tiny fibers of glue, and that glue is just collagen. Now, we have two main portions to a long bone. We have the long portion of the long bone, the shaft. We call this your diaphysis. And then we have two ends. Okay, each one is an epiphysis, so epiphyses is plural. Your epiphyses on each end are covered. You can see this blue layer on each end. This blue layer is your articular cartilage. This is a type of hyaline cartilage. We did mention way back in the histology discussion of cartilages that later hyaline cartilage would be referred to as articular cartilage, specifically in the bones. Okay, so if we are talking about cartilage, hyaline cartilage on the ends of long bones, we do call it articular cartilage instead. Remember, articulations are joints. Okay, this cartilage helps prevent bone-on-bone friction. Okay, and so that's why we only find it at the ends instead of in the middle. Now, the middle, the diaphysis, okay, the shaft, there is a hollow cavity in the middle. Okay, this is your marrow cavity. We have both red marrow, more towards the ends in the epiphyses, but in the diaphysis, we find a lot of yellow bone marrow. As you get older, okay, a lot of this yellow marrow used to be red marrow, but as you get older, we do a little bit of exchanging. You know, we lose most of the red marrow and it becomes yellow marrow. But we do still find red marrow, again, at the epiphyses. Now, your long bones are composed of both compact and spongy bone. Your compact bone is harder and more dense. Okay? This tends to be found in the more outer regions of the bones. This compact bone allows us to be resistant to linear compression forces and twisting forces. Your spongy bone, okay, tends to be more in the middle, okay, and more on the ends of your bones themselves. You will notice that there is a lot of empty spaces. Okay, a lot of times you'll hear it described as a honeycomb-like structure of arrangements. This different arrangement compared to the compact bone, you can see there's not very much empty space in compact bone. This different framework allows us to become resistant in many different directions, not just linear motions. And all of this empty space allows us to create cavities for the bone marrow as well. So you can see this outer region. This is your compact bone, and this inner region, this is your spongy bone. Okay. Now, the inner surface of the bone itself is also lined with tissue. It's called endosteum. Okay. And let me see. It's labeled. It's a little hard to see in this image, but there is that one final layer. So periosteum was around the outside of the bone. Endosteum, endo is inside, so that's our inner layer. Okay. This endosteum is where you have different types of bone cells that work to maintain bone homeostasis. And we'll talk about those different kinds of bone cells a little bit later, but this is where they live, in that endosteum. Now, epiphyseal lines. Let me see. Here we go. Epiphyseal lines I've got them labeled here. These, you find them separating the proximal and distal epiphyses from the diaphysis. So basically, these are two examples, but you could also have an epiphyseal line about here and about here. And again, we're separating the epiphyses from the diaphysis. These lines used to be plates, epiphyseal plates. You might know them better as growth plates. It will not shock you to learn that this is where growth happens. We will talk a lot more about how growth actually works in more detail a little bit later, but just for right now, this is where we used to do the growing, and if you now have epiphyseal lines, you are done getting any taller. You're done growing. All right. Now, the other types of bones that we have: short bones, flat bones, irregular bones, sesamoid bones. Okay, these all look quite a bit different compared to the long bones. They don't all have the same types of structures. These other categories of bones, they do not have the diaphysis, they do not have the epiphyses, they don't have the deep medullary cavity, the epiphyseal lines, plates, any of that. Okay? But they do still have a couple similarities. These types of bones are still covered by periosteum. You can see very easily here these perforating fibers that I was trying my hardest to describe a little bit earlier. Okay, it's gluing down that periosteal layer, and we can see the blood vessels running through that layer as well. Okay. So that's similar. Periosteum, the perforating fibers, the blood vessels. Again, there's no nerves in this picture, but there are nerves that would run along the same pathways as the vessels as well. So all that's the same. Okay. Here's what's a little bit different, though. You can see that we have both compact and spongy bone, but the arrangement is a little bit different. So here we have a layer of compact bone, a layer of spongy bone, another layer of compact bone. This arrangement is called diplo. I call it a bone sandwich. You got some bread, you got some meat, you got some bread. It's a bone sandwich, y'all. Just go with it. This arrangement was just a little bit different. If we go back, let's see, boop, boop, boop. Just a little bit different than here. You'll notice that most of our compact bone made up our diaphysis. Most of our spongy bone was in the epiphyses. So not quite a bone sandwich up here. Okay. All right. So some similarities, some differences. Now, blood supply. Your bones are alive, which means they need nutrients and oxygen, just like everything else in your body. This means we have to have blood supply. We have mentioned the blood vessels, as well as the nerve fibers, coming in from the periosteum and being kind of held in place by the Sharpey's fibers. You will notice in this picture, these nutrient arteries are penetrating through the entire bone itself, making its way into the medullary cavity to make sure everything in this area gets fed. The red marrow itself, okay, you have plenty of blood in the red marrow itself to provide nutrients, but we do have these nutrient arteries that work their way into the bone just to make sure that everybody is well oxygenated and has enough nutrients to get by. So, okay, all right, make sure we cover everything. All right, so we mentioned briefly, and we'll just reiterate here real quick, red marrow versus yellow marrow. Red marrow is the hematopoietic area. This is where you're going to make your new blood cells. As you get older, the amount of red marrow you have decreases. So as you are growing, you have a greater need to continuously create a lot of new cells constantly because you're growing. Once you hit adulthood, it's really just replacing the supply that you have as it gets older. You typically don't have a great need to suddenly make a lot of new blood vessel or blood cells, excuse me. And so we don't need quite as much red marrow. Now, This doesn't mean we don't need any. We still have to be able to make both red and white cells on a continuous basis. And so you can see our little list here: femur, humerus, sternum, a couple others. You do still have red marrow. Okay, we do still have to be able to replace worn out cells. We just don't have to do that quite as much when we reach adulthood. Now the yellow marrow, again, a bunch of this used to be red marrow when you were younger, and we just slowly start to replace the red marrow with the triglycerides, the adipocytes, and things like that instead. And that concludes our introduction to the skeletal system.